Welcome back. It's time for the Aquarius stereotypes. And I have a feeling this one's going to be a bit of a long one because I am an Aquarius sun, so I got some bias here and I have maybe a lot more to say than I did with many of the other signs because I get the Aquarius struggle. I get it. So yeah, we're going to get into the Aquarian stereotypes, people with strong Aquarian placements. Yeah, this is a horrible intro. Okay, let's go. So I just want to start off by saying that I find Aquarians are the hardest sign to pin down, the hardest sign to guess that they're an Aquarius, and that's simply because all Aquarians are so vastly different from each other. There's definitely a underlining core similarity to them and vibe, but it is so much more subtle than other signs I find. And so usually when I'm trying to guess people's signs, which I'm pretty good at, I rarely guess that people are Aquarians. And like, not to say that like every Taurus or like every like Gemini is the same or anything, because absolutely everyone is like different on their own way and they have different signs within their whole chart. But I find time and time again I am stumped by Aquarians, and they make it very hard for you to see that they are an Aquarian. So, little trick, if you can't tell what someone's sign is, like, there's a good chance they could have strong or dominant Aquarius placements. Now, another thing I just want to note here is that, from my observation, is that Aquarian risings are so much more dominant and obvious than Aquarian suns or, like, Aquarian moons. Because, as you might know, like, rising is often described as, like, how you're perceived by others, how you move in the world kind of thing. Aquarian traits are a lot easier to spot when they're in that kind of placement rather than your sun, because, important to note, having the sun in Aquarius is actually means it's in its detriment, which is just means that it's a difficult place for the sun to be. And that is because the sun is all about the ego and the self, and then Aquarians, their whole spiel is about the collective, about how everyone like fits into the world. And often Aquarians struggle with ego, where they either have too much of it or too little of it, and they don't really know who they are. And I just want to prefix that, like, ego is not necessarily a negative thing. Ego is extremely necessary for us to function in the world that we live in, but it's just about the balance. And the thing with Aquarians is often that they have an imbalance of ego and of understanding the self. So, as I was kind of mentioning, Aquarius is to do with the collective. It's in the 11th house, which is the house of, like, friendships, community, that kind of thing. But then at the same time, Aquarians are also about the individual. They're individualists simultaneously as they are collectivists. And so they really see and understand the importance and the balance of these two things and how they're almost correlated. You need one to have the other. I hope you're still with me here. What we're talking about is going to kind of bring us into the first stereotype, which is like by far the most common stereotype I hear about Aquarians, and that is that Aquarians are quirky. Aquarians are quirky. Aquarians are weird. They don't fit inside the box. Like, there's something strange and off about them. And yeah, that totally can be true and is true a lot of the time. But I'm just gonna unpack why Aquarians might be this way. Aquarians are just, like, notoriously bad at hiding their genuine selves. It does not come naturally to them. And also, I think a lot of Aquarians feel that being their genuine, true, authentic self is good for all. Like, it's good for the collective, and what's good for the collective is good for them, and what's good for them is good for the collective, kind of thing. They can often kind of get lost in that. But another thing of why, like, Aquarians might be perceived and look really quirky is because all the interests and hobbies and passions that they collect throughout their life are almost an extension of themselves, and this is shown through their fashion and, like, the way that they do their hair or their makeup, or the way that they even speak. And again, that's going back to they struggle with ego. Like, sometimes Aquarians can kind of depend on things and topics and interests that they have, or like even groups that they're part of. They often lose themselves within those and think that those things are them, when that's not really what your true self and true essence and soul is. Also, it's important to note that one of Aquarian's planet rulers is Uranus or Uranus.
No, 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 no.
And that is all to do with freedom, originality, like things changing. The age of Aquarius. Aquarians really do value originality and uniqueness and things that differ from what you see. And so often they're going to want to put that into how they present themselves, into their fashion, etc. But like there's a lot of the times that I have met Aquarian suns, for instance, where they totally dress like the average person, but there's something more about their essence or about how the way they speak that feels a little bit more original or offbeat. So yes, Aquarians are quirky and like look super wild sometimes, but sometimes like they are kind of hidden. They look like normies. So now the second most heard stereotype I hear about this sign is that Aquarians are aloof, unemotional, cold, stubborn, that kind of vibe. And let me remind you that Aquarians are air signs, not water signs. I know that the symbol for Aquarius is a water bearer, so that's a little confusing. But it's so fitting for Aquarians because Aquarians confuse the fuck out of people and are so like contradictive sometimes. So I find that kind of hilarious. So yeah, they are an air sign, and so they are going to process their emotions and the way that they process the world in their thoughts. And another thing to note is that their second or other like planetary ruler, depending on modern or traditional astrology, is Saturn. And Saturn is often a very restrictive planet. And so I kind of see that as sometimes their emotions or certain things about them are restricted or more rigid. So that could be kind of part of it. That's just my take on it. I don't really know how valid that is, but no, I think partially why people can view Aquarians as kind of aloof and cold is that they're kind of sign to react right away to what you're saying. And so it's kind of seems like they don't care what you're saying, or they're kind of in their own world, which can be true. But I think for a lot of Aquarians, it takes a lot of time for them to process what you're saying because they are going to have so many perspectives on that and connect what you're saying to so many other things. And yeah, they want to connect these things to like into other things and to other people's perspectives and their many perspectives before making conclusions or opinions of their own. I find Aquarians kind of struggle with having their own personal opinions and rather take other people's opinions or other people's opinions that they've like read about and stuff like that. Again, that's kind of going back to the ego. They don't really have a good sense of self, strangely. And yeah, another thing to note is that Aquarians are very much observers, and they are also like often observed themselves just because they're so out of the box and noticeable. And not only are they observing other people, but they are often observing themselves and observing how they interact with people, how they fit into a group of people or to even like a group talking social dynamic. And so they're kind of detached from themselves, which often can translate into other people sensing that they are emotionally detached or detached in just some way when they are conversating with them. As an air sign, their understanding of their emotions does come from a more logistical, like thinking perspective rather than a feeling one. However, there is kind of another stereotype that Aquarians are a bit unfeeling or aren't very emotional, but I find that Aquarians are very emotional, but it's just not something they know how to process or deal with very well, and it comes out in different ways. So yeah, because they are observing themselves like so much and observing others, they are, rather than being in the moment, which a lot of signs are like a lot better at doing, they are kind of experiencing the experience from an objective, detached point of view, even when that thing or that conversation is happening right then and there. Now, another stereotype that is often associated to Aquarians is that they are humanitarianists. humanitarianists, I believe, or activists or something of that sort. And yeah, I would say that is true for a lot of Aquarians for sure. Aquarians are surprisingly deeply empathetic, especially for the larger collective, like for other people in the world, for the human race. And they really kind of follow the moral, I guess, that if there's no peace for all of us, then none of us are at peace, kind of thing. And so you can often like see Aquarians fighting back against social and like political issues. Like it really just makes me think of like, the age of Aquarius. Yeah, and Aquarians, I think, as I kind of mentioned before, they really recognize that everything is connecting. We all, as humans, are connected and share the same qualities, and that pain to someone else is often pain to them. Yeah, they just understand that individualism is part of collectivism, and you can't have one without the other. Now, just because Aquarians have a very like activist value system, that doesn't necessarily mean that all Aquarians are going to be activists, are going to be out on the front lines fighting for rights and stuff. Also come in a more quiet, subtle way where just from their values that they share with people is their contribution to changing, altering culture, society, the collective way of thinking. Aquarians are great at showing other perspectives of things, of pushing back on structures and systems that have been here a while. So the next stereotype is kind of a funny one in my opinion, but I really notice it in a lot of Aquarian placements, is that Aquarians are pretentious. um Myself think that I can come across as kind of pretentious when I'm talking to people or talking about things I like, and it's very deeply a concern for me because I would hate to come across as pretentious, but often worry that I do. Now, I feel like Aquarians are very much known for talking about topics, movies, subjects, like that random actor from 1964 that was somehow important. They're often talking about things that you've never fucking heard of, and they kind of make it feel like you should know what they're talking about, even though the thing that they're interested in is probably so niche that how could you know about it? And so Aquarians often struggle finding people to talk about their very niche interests with, just because they're so not like mainstream or anything, and that can be a little bit annoying. But often, like more often the case is that Aquarians are not actually aware of that they're sounding pretentious, and a lot of the time like Aquarians don't necessarily care that you don't know what they're talking about. They're not like looking down on you and being like, you should know about this. But it's one of their ways of trying to connect with people, but it often doesn't go so well. So Aquarians try to find connection through talking about the human experience, which can involve things like art. How they best feel like they can best connect with people is through talking about things that you both experience. And this isn't necessarily like kind of surface level thing of like, oh yeah, that happens to me too when I like put away the dishes or whatever. Like that is not so much what they're interested in. They fucking Aquarians hate small talk. They're like allergic to it. Their version of small talk is like talking about obscure shit or like subtleties of the human experience. They love unpacking that kind of shit. And often I feel a lot of Aquarians feel like it's their job to spread small artists and like small creators that are very niche and that not many people know about, because they think that they ought to be noticed and seen and acknowledged just because they have such a deep appreciation for their work. And another thing is that Aquarians, again, they see themselves in things that they're interested in, so that could be through different artists and stuff, and so they're going to want to talk about it because that's kind of expressing themselves. And then often like they could feel like misunderstood or unheard because no one knows who or what they're talking about, but to them like that's also an extension to themselves, so it feels like, oh, I am misunderstood because you don't know what I'm even talking about. Now, I find Aquarians, especially like in group conversations or one-on-one conversations when you're talking about something, especially something that's very like deep and there's a lot of layers to it, is that they are always going to bring up a new perspective, push back very like known perspectives, and they're not doing this to be annoying necessarily, although it can come across that way because they're constantly kind of disagreeing with you or being like, well, actually, there's this. It's not that they're not agreeing with you on points, but they are trying to add and contribute more to the conversation and try to spread the kind of message that like nothing is black and white. Aquarians are, oh my god, Aquarians are so like, they're so non-binary energy. Like they're so like, everything is a spectrum to an Aquarian. And a fun little thing I often notice is that Aquarians are, they always seem to look very like, or a lot more androgynous than other people. And they're, yeah, they could be genderqueer in some way. This is not like a hard and harsh rule, but it's just something that I've kind of noticed, which is a little bit fun. And that also goes back to kind of that Aquarians are quirky or they look different than the average person, is that they're not going to follow binaries or gender structures or anything like that because they understand that there's a lot more to it to explore. Now, another stereotype about Aquarians is that they are the kind of loner archetype or the wallflower archetype. You know, that kid in school where they don't really seem to have many close friends, but they talk with everyone or seem to kind of get along with everyone, or they're a bit more like a social outcast where they're a bit too weird for anyone to really like want to talk to. And I do want to make it very clear that Aquarians are not necessarily loners. They actually crave and need, in order to be healthy, deep connection to people and to the world. They are, I've kind of heard Aquarians be described as that they are the extroverted introverts because they are, as being an air sign, they are in their heads a lot and their minds a lot, and they are quite comfortable and happy and content being in that. But at the same time, in order for more new original ideas to go through their mind, they need to talk to people and interact with the world around them. And if they're not doing that, then they're going to be pretty depressed and not feel like themselves. Now, the struggle with this is that often Aquarians feel like they're not understood or that they're just perceived in the wrong way. Like, very often struggle finding connection to people no matter how hard they try. And again, I think this kind of goes back to they struggle distinguishing ego from their actual authentic self and thinking that, oh, if I'm talking to a person and there's certain like subjects or topics that like we like where like we don't have a lot of things in common, like surface level things that we have in common or how we like view the world, then they completely forget that there's other things that you can relate to from human to human, which is kind of ironic because like they're all about like, hey, we're all connected, but it's just ironic because they don't seem to kind of follow their own idea about that or be able to experience that fully. Like, it's funny because Aquarians are the kind of people who's like they can relate to everyone, but to a certain extent, and then it doesn't seem to go deeper. And sometimes it's just totally their own skewed perspective of being like, oh, like I don't connect with anyone, kind of thing. But there actually is a connection. They just aren't really using their heart in the matter. They're depending more on their mind, which you kind of need both in order to truly feel connected to someone. Yeah, another thing to mention is that Aquarians are very, very curious about the world around them and about other people. However, they especially love the type of people that are like them in the way that they are unconventional and maybe stump them a little bit and like you can't quite figure them out. They love figuring out people like that. And so often you're going to see Aquarians have a big variety of friends, people that come from all sorts of backgrounds, people that even like look different from each other or dress very differently. It's rare. I find it's rare for Aquarian to just have one type of friend that they keep or seem to attract, because they attract all sorts of different people, and that's just kind of how they like it. But often Aquarians may have a big group of friends. Yeah, they're ruled by the house that rules friendships and stuff and community. So they may have many friends, but they actually might not be very close with these friends. They just have, there's specific things that they might just talk about or they relate to each other in some way. But I find for Aquarians, it takes a lot for them to open up and feel totally close and connected to people. Another reason why they have like so many different types of friends is that, again, Aquarians really value uniqueness and originality and people showing up in like their own personable way. Now, I find often when people are like stereotyping Aquarians or kind of like complaining about them is often in like romantic context and situations. Because yeah, Aquarians I think are pretty fucking difficult to date or like be in a long-term relationship with. There are issues, you know, with them being sometimes emotionally unavailable and stuff. Yeah, one of those stereotypes that I kind of keep seeing come up is that they are hard to catch, kind of in a way like Sagittarians, where like whole Sagittarians are afraid of commitment kind of thing. Like it's kind of like that vibe, but more so like it's difficult for you to catch the interest of an Aquarian and to get them to stay. And as I was mentioning before, Aquarians often struggle with making friends and maintaining friends and deepening connections, so that also makes it quite difficult for an Aquarius to fall in love or be in a committed partnership. One thing to note is that a lot of Aquarians, not necessarily all, like could be interested in polyamory or like consensual non-monogamous relationships. Many Aquarians could probably feel quite constricted in one-on-one monogamous committed relationships, and so often you might see Aquarians in polycules or in a relationship with several different people, or like in an open relationship. And sometimes that doesn't go well, but sometimes that is like genuinely the healthiest thing for the Aquarius to do. But yeah, one reason why Aquarians are hard to catch or it's difficult for them to fall in love is that they don't fall for singular traits of a person. Those traits could intrigue them, but they like need to know the entirety of a being, the essence of a person to fall for. And that is harder to do if, you know, like they're not a love at first sight kind of sign, because they need to collect information and connect that information to their different perspectives and like the collective perspectives and see how you function in this world, how you work in this world. That's what they really admire. It's less about just the person, but how that person fits into the world around them. Is that's what they're kind of going to fall for. I find Aquarians are actually a very grounded air sign, which kind of comes as a surprise to a lot of people. And so, you know, like Taurus, Capricorn, Virgo, it's going to take a while. It's going to take a lot of time for them to build trust and companionship and connection to someone. And so they are definitely more slow movers when it comes to relationships, which make them a little bit more harder to catch. And also, like, it takes a lot for an Aquarian to be intrigued by someone. So, like, you better have a lot to offer to the Aquarian if you're going to want to pursue a relationship with them. Also, yeah, as I kind of mentioned, like, I swear to God, so many Aquarians are just like emotionally unavailable or like afraid of intimacy and have like intimacy issues. But that's another video for another day. Now, I so deeply hope that any of that was coherent in any way. I find talking about Aquarians very hard just because it's hard for me to be objective about it, as it's a very subjective experience for me because I have my sun in Aquarius as well as many other placements. So I really hope there wasn't too much of a bias and that things made enough sense and that you took something away from this. And yeah, my videos are not the most organized, even though I do write a little bit of notes. So I always just like hope and pray that I'm coming across in a way that makes some sense, even if it's not the most coherent. But yeah, those are all the Aquarian stereotypes I have to talk to today. So many more things I want to talk about more in detail about Aquarians and other signs. But until next time, I will see you in my Pisces video. That's going to be very hard to verbalize. But yeah, I hope this has made you have a new understanding and perspective of the Aquarian experience. This was, what is the word? Informative. I hope this was informative to you. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you thought of that. Anything you have to add on to this kind of list of stereotypes or important things about Aquarians to know. And I will see you next time. Bye.